Namaste and greetings. I am Mahima Kapoor, researcher and assistant editor at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान नई दिल्ली. Welcome you all to the IMPRI #Web Policy Talk. In light of the budget 2022 to 23 announcement on 1st of February, we have gathered for a panel discussion on the environment and union budget 2022 to 23. Under the series, The State of the Environment, #Planet Talks. This deliberation is being organized by the IMPRI Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development. I feel honored to introduce the chair, Mr. Ashish Kothari. Sir is the founder member of Kalpavriksh. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I feel privileged to introduce our eminent panel for today. Mr. Debadityo Sinha is the Research Senior Resident Fellow and Lead, Climate and Ecosystems at Vidhi Center for Legal Policy, New Delhi. Welcome, sir. Dr. Madhu Verma is the Chief Economist at World Resources Institute, New Delhi. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dr. Sharachchandra Lele is the Distinguished Fellow in Environmental Policy and Governance at Center for Environment and Development, ATREE, Bengaluru. Welcome, sir. Mr. Soumya Dutta is the co-convener of South Asian People's Action on Climate Crisis. Welcome, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Raman is the National Convener, Public Health Resource Network and Policy Advisor, WaterAid India. Welcome, sir.
Thank you and glad to be here.
Thank you, sir. Now I invite Mr. Kothari to take the proceedings further, and we look forward to learning from our esteemed gathering. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Mahima. And can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you for this. Thanks to Arjun, thanks to IMPRI for organizing this. And in fact, I would like to appreciate IMPRI for organizing a whole series of, for being a platform for organizing a whole series of very interesting discussions on policy issues. So congratulations for that. And it's good to have this kind of a forum. Well, we have a great panel and I'm very much looking forward to listening to all of them. Apologies on behalf of IMPRI and all of us for the rather poor gender diversity on the panel. We hope to improve next time, but hopefully all the men, or however we define ourselves in terms of gender, will also be able to take a gendered perspective on the budget today. The 2-hour session is going to be in a conversation format, no speeches. There will be 3 or 4 rounds with all the panelists where I will be asking them some questions. And we hope to shed quite a lot of light on the budget that has just been announced 2 days back. I'd like to make some very brief opening remarks, which are more from a amateur analysis point of view. I think our 5 panelists will be having much more expert comments than I. But just to set the ball rolling, one of the things that I feel is important is to, when we're talking about the budget and environment, is to try and analyze it from at least 3 points of view. The panelists will probably add more points, but one is the direct allocations to environment, which is of course the Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. The second is indirect allocations, which are oriented towards the environment, explicitly so, which could be, for instance, in the fields of energy or in the field of agriculture as examples. And the third is allocations to other sectors which have an implication for the environment. Unintended, or I don't know about intended or not, but certainly unintended implications for the environment. This could be things like infrastructure, industry, etc. Now, when I was looking through elements of the budget, I found what I think is very interesting aspects along each of these 3 lines. So if one looks at the allocations directly to the Ministry the MOEFCC, there is an increase in the outlay. But what's very interesting is that the outlay is something like 0.8 or less than 0.8% of the total outlay. Now, this could be an indication of how important this government considers the environment, because it's not even 1% of the total budget. It's much less than that. And in fact, this has been consistently so since 1991-92, but it has in fact seriously even declined further in the last few years. And I remember long back a conversation we had when Dr. Manmohan Singh, at that point finance minister in 1991, had given a lecture on the new economic policies and the environment. As most of you will remember, 1991 was the time when the Indian economy was globalized. There were all kinds of so-called reforms that were brought in to put it much more into the global as part of the global economy. And he had said then that I recognize that there are environmental implications of the kind of economic measures we are going to take. But India needs to be able to generate the resources through this kind of globalized economy to then be able to put into environmental protection. And you will see that, in fact, we will substantially be raising the resources to be put into the environment sector as we go along. Now, as we know, the analysis we've done suggests that that has not happened at all. If anything, outlays, at least in terms of percentage of total budget, have actually been consistently going down. And even on specific things like pollution, the National Clean Air Program, for instance, has actually had a reduction in allocation, despite the fact that we have so much evidence pouring in of the horrendous levels of air pollution in our cities. So that's the first aspect, the direct allocations, and I'm sure our panelists will have more to say. The second aspect, which is indirect environmental allocations in other sectors, for instance, with climate, because the finance minister very explicitly said that this is a budget oriented towards climate, towards the Panchamrit announcements that Prime Minister Modi made in Glasgow at COP26, towards moving towards net zero and so on. And you find certain allocations for things like carbon intensity in our power stations, so-called circular economy, natural farming or natural or organic farming, etc. Though, on the other hand, subsidies for chemical fertilizers is also substantially increased. There are other things like, for instance, ecologically sustainable alternatives for conventional roads in hilly areas, so instead of roads to build ropeways. And there's talk about a paradigm shift in urban living to make it more sustainable, including through public transportation, etc. So there are some elements like that, which again, I'm sure the panel will have more expertise to share on whether, in fact, these do make it better for the environment or they're mostly peripheral. The third and final aspect of way of analyzing this would be to look at the other sectors, which are not directly to do with environment, nor have any allocations which are explicitly meant for ecology and environment. And here, I think if one looks at this budget, the biggest allocations are actually to infrastructure. And that's what the finance minister also said, that this whole budget is oriented towards a significant push on infrastructure, roads, railways, airports, etc. We know that large infrastructure has serious ecological implications. We've seen it all across the country for many years, many decades. It does say that, however, it will be powered by clean energy. So does that some way compensate for the ecological impacts or not? This is something I'm sure the panel will also dwell on. We know that there's also a significant budgetary allocation for river linking, especially in this case, the Ken-Betwa project, which has been pointed out to be ecologically quite disastrous by many critics, but that allocation is there. We also need to look at allocations that are meant to be, or at least stated to be, in sectors like for Dalits, for Adivasis, for women, and what the environmental implications of those could be, to actually take a sort of a more intersectional approach to this discussion. The last thing I want to mention is that I did a very quick search of 6-7 keywords in the finance minister's speech. I looked at whether, in fact, she had mentioned ecology, environment, ecosystem, pollution, nature, wildlife, and biodiversity. And I found not a single mention on any of these, except in usage like business environment, growth ecosystem, etc. So in none of the ecological and environmental senses was this figuring at all in the entire speech of the finance ministry. Is that an indication of how serious this government takes environmental and ecological issues? That's a question I'm going to put to the panel. So let's start off with the panel. We're going to have 3 or 4 rounds of questions and responses from them. First round is going to be very, very short. I want to ask the panel, what's the first, sort of the most important thing that comes to mind? What's the one thing that stands out for you, positive or negative, about this budget? Just tell us in like a minute. So let's start with Debadityo.
So thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity to respond first. So I think there is like, if you ask me significant, so there are so many significant, like, introduction to the budget. And I was just trying to see what are the new additions. And every budget just reflects the kind of policies and laws which have been amended recently. And you can clearly see, by this hurriedly, we amended CRZ, the Biological Diversity Act, we're trying to do that, Forest Conservation Act. So one thing which strike me of very much is that there's a push for 2-3 sectors. One is infrastructure, we already said. One is industrialization for textile and food processing. This is very important. There is a significant jump in the amount of budget just put for textile and food processing, and I will come to that later on, details of it. Of course, roads, NHI has got a double budget for that. And there is an increased focus on coast and ocean development across all the schemes, and even in emergency you will find, like, last year they introduced this deep ocean mission. Now the budget is increased to, I think, 4 or 5 times, and it is actually for exploring hydrocarbons. There is also national coastal mission, and we all know, like, about in the budget itself, the document says that with the help of WHO they are managing the coast in Andaman and Lakshadweep. So we know how this management has been there. But other thing I want to point out that this budget is very much focusing on large industrialization, because I just give an example of one, and I will close my.
Devaditya, we'll come back to you for more details.
Okay.
I just wanted that one quick headline. If you're writing a newspaper headline, what would you put? That's what I wanted just to see. We'll come back to the details that you want to give. Right?
Sure.
Thanks a lot for that. Madhuji.
Thank you, Ashish. First of all, definitely welcome step is that of getting the budget increase for Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change. You rightly said had been declining for last couple of years, but there's a little bit of increase in that. In fact, the entire budget is called as the booster budget, but the booster shots are not equally spread across different sectors. Somewhere I think additional booster doses are being given, others are still deficient and not being given at all. But happy that the budget has increased, because I worked all my life for the ministry's organization, and then very keen that our budget should come for that. But definitely, if you go to the granularity part of the budget increase, you will definitely find, first of all, increase in the value for National Mission for Green India, and definitely which has gone up considerably recently, and then also increasing the budget for Project Tiger and Project Elephant, which received a downfall in last couple of years. Definitely, but if you go further deeper into it, you do see a lot of development happening around oceans, but at the same time, the budget for National Coastal Mission, which was increased last year, was actually reduced. And of course, we are committed to so many international targets, and to achieve that, definitely you have to have, first of all, reduction of emissions. That's why you should have increased budget of abatement of pollution, which actually has gone down by 10%. So these are the kind of things that we find in the budget, and definitely rightly mentioned about the linking of rivers. We have to weigh pros and cons, what are the kind of benefits to get, and then what is the ecological loss happening, whether the loss is reversible or not, or whether we should go ahead with this kind of interventions. That would be my initial take for the budget.
Okay, thanks, Madhuji. Over to Sharad.
Hi, Ashish. Thanks, and hello to everybody else. Ashish, you've taken some of the words out of my mouth, which is fine, because there's a whole bunch of things we can talk about. If you wanted a single point, I would say I would come back to the question of infrastructure and link it with specifically the energy infrastructure side of the budgeting, because they have painted that that's the only part of their infrastructure budgeting which is kind of semi-green, in the sense there's a lot of support for renewables and stuff like that. But the caveat I would like to add, even where they have provided budgetary support for increased renewable energy generation, the important thing for us to note is that the entire model of supporting the transition, so-called energy transition, to meet Paris commitments or whatever it might be, is a capitalist model of transition. So any fiscal policy like a subsidy or an incentive will get redistributed depending upon the underlying structure of the economy, right? So if you have the economy dominated by small players, then it will get distributed more evenly. If you're giving a subsidy for example, rooftop solar power generation, then it goes in a very different direction as compared to if you were giving, massive subsidies for the centralized generation of renewables. And as you know, the underlying structure of the renewable energy economy is no different from the underlying structure of the regular energy economy, which is a extremely capital intensive and semi-monopoly or oligopoly kind of structure. And I think therefore these incentives will lead to perhaps a transition superficially, but not address any of the underlying problems. There are of course limitations even to the kind of incentives given in the renewable energy sector, which I'll come back to. But I think basically the structure is not changing, so we cannot hope to achieve much out of this.
Thanks. I mean, I think these are very important points. So we certainly will want more elaboration from you on this. I go to Soumya.
Thanks, Ashish, and thanks, IMPRI, for organizing this. My comment, most important comment is the most outstanding thing in this budget in terms of environment and climate is its hypocrisy. In fact, Ms. Sitharaman talks about climate change being the greatest external risk for Indian economy, and all the push that is there is basically for very high emission, high energy kind of infrastructure. If you look at a few things, road transport has seen a 68% increase to 2 lakh crores. And total budget for Ministry of Environment and Forest is 3,030 crores. The civil aviation budget is 10,677 crores. And all of us know that aviation is the most emission intensive activity that you can do. Any transport activity that you do, aviation is by far the most emission intensive. There are a few good points like in this sector, like this announcement, I'll take it on face value, of this 400 Vande Bharat trains and all, in emphasis on comparatively lower cost, lower emission, reasonably fast transport is good, but that's minuscule in terms of, in comparison to what is being pushed as very high pollution, very high emission infrastructure. So that will be my initial comment.
Thanks, thanks, Soumya. And I think one should remember also here that she has called this a Amrit Kal budget meant to be for the next 25 years. So I think all the points that you people are raising, especially in terms of infrastructure and its potential impacts, are very important to come back to and have more elaborate discussion. So finally, Ramanji.
Yeah. Thanks, Ashish. When I looked at this budget, essentially from 5 angles. One was about air quality improvement that you already told about, and the disaster resilience was another aspect that I was looking at, and I found that it was not really in the current time of high amount of disaster. The focus on the disaster resilience is inadequate, as I feel. The third thing I looked at was environmental sanitation. I am, the focus, much needed focus on the small and medium towns for water conservation or, water body protection in those areas. I don't think, this is going to be in focus even for the coming year. I don't know whether it is going to come in focus in the coming 25 years. Eradication of manual scavenging was something I was looking at. That is also not really coming in as the major issue. And finally, I also looked at this word search that you did. So I was not able to find disaster, conservation, forest, those kinds of words as well, in this thing. So overall, these 5 areas I'll be kind of putting some focus on. There are some highlights, but I'll come to that when we discuss things in details.
Thanks a lot, Raman. So I think that's a really great set of issues that has come up. Obviously, I think common to most of you is the issue of infrastructure and the huge emphasis that's been given on this, but also things that are missing. And I think most of you also mentioned pollution or air quality as something that perhaps has been neglected significantly in this. But also, I think some of you mentioned that there are some good aspects to it or positive aspects. So it'll be good to actually go into a more complex and nuanced discussion on the budget. So I'm going to again go back in the same order, and then perhaps in the next round we'll switch order also. But Debadityo, back to you. You mentioned infrastructure, textiles, ocean, industrialization, etc. I think if your infrastructure points are going to be mostly about energy and roads and so on, we could probably let Sharad and Soumya deal with them. I think the point you made, which nobody else has, is to do with textiles. That's an important one. Yeah. And perhaps the oceans one. So if you could dwell more on these two.
Yeah, so actually I was just trying to see when these sectors, there is a significant jump in the budget allocation, and I came across Ministry of Textiles. So in 2020, the budget was 3,109 crores, and 2021 it was initially it was 3,600 crores, but it was revised to 11,400 crores. Okay, in the budget, and this year the budget is 12,357 crores just for Ministry of Textile. So I went to the website, I downloaded this document for Ministry of Textiles, and I found this huge addition is for industries. And when I say industry, there are two rows where industries mentioned. One is mentioned village and small industry, which is 1,513 crores, which is almost like marginal increase from the previous years. It was 200 crores, now 1,500 crores. So that is fine. That is as normal as others. But this industries is for big industries, and it clearly says that to empower more large-scale industrialization. So this Ministry of Textiles thing is something new, and there has been like nearly 4 times jump in the budgetary allocation just for industry, textile industry. So it is one thing we need to talk about. And secondly, I want this ocean thing. Last year, we were in the same talk, and I mentioned about this thing. There's a new scheme called Deep Ocean Mission, which was marketed as an environmental mission. Actually, it was with ISRO for the exploration of hydrocarbon. So last year, for the first time, they allocated 150 crores. Now this year, they have increased this to 650 crores. This is one aspect. This is for minerals or whatever. So you do many things to explore this thing. Now, secondly, the budget for so there is also this National Coastal Mission, and there the budget has been increased to 195 crores from 100 crores last year. It was 68 crores a couple of years ago. And interestingly, last year the budget was 200 crores, but it was revised to 100. And in the budget document itself for this coastal management plan, it says, and it is under MOFCC, it says the focus will be on Andaman and Lakshadweep. And it also gives a footnote that ministry is already implementing some integrated coastal zone management with the assistance of World Bank and conserving, protecting, and promoting sustainable development. Now we have seen in Andaman, they have denotified a sanctuary. They are going to develop tourism in Lakshadweep. Also, this thing is going on. So this, and there is one more significant aspect I just want to flag it out. That's in the Ministry of Environment's budget. We have seen there is one allocation of budget. It is for other research, other environmental research. It is not clear what is this other environmental research. The budget has been increased to 83 crores from 24 crores last year. And it is not clear on what research they will be using, because all the institute research into the budget has been reduced. And this other part is not clear. And there's one last thing about the ocean thing only. It's related to that. It's a blue revolution. And this budget is now nearly 1,900 crores from 1,200 crores last year. It was 700 crores in 2020. So blue revolution means aquaculture and all this kind of things. And there has been significant ecological impact of sustainable aquaculture along the coastal region, whether it is Sundarban or any other area. So that's all from my side about the ocean and textile.
Thanks, Debadityo. Just a quick follow-up question. So on the deep ocean thing, you had pointed this out last year, I remember, and again, you're pointing it out. There is no component of the conservation of the deep ocean areas?
Absolutely not. Because I checked from the various sources, it is clearly say that it is for mineral and all these things. So it is exploration of hydrocarbons.
Right. And I think last year also the kind of ministries that were involved were all the ones which there was either defense or minerals exploration, etc. Those are the sorts of ministries that were involved. So the same now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. We will come back to you on some of these other issues. Madhuji, pointed out some of the good news. So maybe if you want to elaborate that, but also, of course, the concerns that you have.
Is unmute, ma'am.
Well, I did say because the budget has declined for the ministry last year and there was so much of requirement of conservation. As rightly pointed out, when you search the popular words in the budget, you didn't find them. In fact, I was looking forward. We are in the already in the decade of ecosystem restoration. The UN declared 2021 30th year decade of restoration. We also pushed this case of International Year of Millet to FAO, went to UN and finally got confirmed. In 2023 is the year of millets, International Year of Millets as well. And we have to achieve SDGs by 2030, and we committed so much in Paris Convention. A couple of things have happened. So I was looking forward to actually get a lot of such, I would say, boost towards biodiversity conservation because, because we have been working in this domain with the ministry and with a couple of other organizations to prove that what biodiversity conservation leads to, I don't know, why do we always take nature or conservation and development as competing forces? It is not nature versus, or conservation versus development, it's conservation and development hand in gloves together. In fact, my previous institute where I worked in Industry of Forest Management, a very interesting, message to give. It says, Pragati Moolam Prakriti, development ka jo base of development is nature. And where I work now in World Resources Institute, we have this, sort of a slogan of change it, count it, and scale it. And we talk a lot about nature conservation, nature-based solutions. So I think I was looking forward to get more such, solutions directly for the ministry, and huge, amount of biodiversity conservation spurt should be there. Of course, budget has gone up for tiger and elephant, projects, but still, it's a small value. It should be much more than what it provides to. Our own studies in the past proved that a dollar invested or be invested in certain tiger reserves, multiple times of returns from that. Same thing goes with the conserved habitats and forest areas. So that's what was expected very much. And but the linking to, as well, you said in the first question, the first round of introduction, that direct allocation and indirect allocation. I'll just try to connect with the indirect allocation towards overall nature conservation, biodiversity conservation. I was a little happy to see about the promotion of millet production in the country, because we of course signed, we promoted this cause of International Year of Millet. It talked about the increase in domestic consumption, because we used to have high consumption of millets once upon many years ago. It declined so much. They talked about value addition, post-harvest interventions, and branding also of millets, because not just for domestic consumption but for exports as well could definitely be an important aspect. Similarly, I was also expecting to get a lot of such intervention support for organic farming, natural farming, subsidies. Of course, natural farming has been greatly promoted in this particular budget, and alongside Ganga River and overall natural forestry definitely should be taken care of. But there should be combination of incentive-based mechanisms, compensation rewards to people who are taking up this, because there's a huge difference initial years to actually get the same output that you get with the inorganic sort of cultivation. So that's what kind of gaps still exist. We just visited Sikkim and did study complete model of organic farming in Sikkim state, and found that yes, it is happening, but the connecting links are still missing. To make the whole model comprehensive, holistic, you have to have good certification process, subsidies, input subsidies for organic farming, certification, grading, value chain strengthening, cold storage, and marketing mechanisms. So that's what, once we provide some intervention, it should be holistic intervention, not just piecemeal, which will just, start with a, bang and end with a whimper kind of thing. So that's what I would say, that we should be a little careful about providing a holistic kind of solutions to these kinds of issues. Then only will be able to make the dent in the overall problem. The same thing I look at the environmental ministry. I mean, in few areas, budgets have gone up, but other areas have been declined. So maybe we will have cancelling effects sometimes, but overall change might not reflect upon the way it is intended to. So that's what we should be careful about making declarations. Thank you.
Thank you, Madhuji. I think a couple of very, very important, interesting points that you made here, which is that on the face of it, there seem to be some positive things, but then the detailed part of it may not be so clear or so positive. Let me ask you a quick question, follow-up question. So you mentioned, for instance, millet promotion. I also saw that millets are being specifically mentioned. In a way, that's good, at least symbolic. Everybody was ignoring millets till a few years back. And I think that's partly a result of the significant farmers movements which have been pushing millets, and that's in a way good. But the question I have is there a clear link between, say, the promotion of millets and small farmer rights and their ability to be able to generate livelihoods through that? Or is there a possibility that, in fact, the big sector, the big industry will also enter into millets with branding and all of that and then make profits from it?
Yeah, interesting question. In fact, we've studied all those models of Odisha, what is happening in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh, and then of course Uttarakhand, and many such organizations are promoting this. Institutes of millet research separately being established, international and national institute. There are agri startups. There are nutrient-based entrepreneurship being started, and there's a lot of support now being given for agri entrepreneurship in this particular domain. But still, it has to see light of the day, because unless until the consumption pattern changes, even if we increase production, increase supply, things will not make a difference in the lives of people. And besides that, as you're rightly saying, they have lots of indirect benefits to handle. Rather, they become direct many a times, and in fact, they're highly climate resilient, and they are so nutrient rich. Besides that, they definitely give livelihoods to many people. They're reviving the traditional, practices as well, because what we have lost in the past, and millets cultivation, very interesting style of cultivation, and very useful in the sense that it provides so many I work upon a lot on ecosystem services provisioning, and that's what we should. That's what I was trying to say. Look at the holistic picture, the complete picture. What we call as a total contribution of any intervention, or say we take millet cultivation up. It's not that at the front that you get millet available in physical quantities, but it provides so much amount of support. So I think it requires further support, and as you rightly said, quite possible in due course of time, when you get the profit margin available, maybe the big entrepreneurs join in, and the profit margin should be wiped off. So there should be some good schemes which especially channelize, the production of the small and marginal farmers. But there's also a scheme which is going to trying to, also promote scheduled caste and scheduled tribe farmers as well. So, and large areas in the millet are being cultivated by them. So I think that kind of safety mechanism should be created when we are making such interventions. Then only it will really realize its actual, intent and actual potential, and these small and marginal farmers will get benefited.
Thanks, Madhujin. I think the point you also made about the various linkages that have to be made when you're talking about, say, natural farming. It reminds me of this news from Sri Lanka, right? A few months back, where there was this big news item, especially celebrated by the chemical industry, that Sri Lanka organic farming has failed, and farmers are up in arms against it. And then, of course, people are pointing it out that you had basically just suddenly announced a shift away from chemical to organic without actually doing all the preparatory stuff for it. So it was bound to fail in that sense. And that's a danger we might face here also, if there's this sudden shift to so-called natural or organic or zero budget farming without all the preparatory stuff that is needed. So the linkages that you mentioned, I think, are very, very important. Thanks for that. Sharad, I come to you now. I think you mentioned in your initial remarks about infrastructure, and especially about the fact that it remains a very, even with renewable energy, remains a very capitalist model. Can you go a little bit further into that, and what are the dangers of this?
Sure, but before I go into that, I just want to make a prefatory remark, which is kind of a big picture remark, which is that any government has sort of roughly three tools at its disposal to implement any particular policy, right? It's fiscal, it's administrative, and it's legal. So it can pass laws, it can put in more, human resources or its machinery behind implementing something, or it can put in money for actually implementing something, or incentivize states to do it. So I think when we read the fiscal budget, the budget is the fiscal part of the story. It's not the full story. And we must keep what's happening in the other arms also in mind when we evaluate what's happening in the fiscal front. So you could have a lot of money poured in on something where you have no proper laws and you have no proper administrative machinery. And I think I'd like in a second round, if possible, to mention the water sector as a classic example of that, where you see some really interesting allocations for groundwater budgeting and groundwater stuff, regulation and stuff like that, but no real change in the whole regulatory infrastructure, both legal as well as administrative. So I think that's something to keep in mind. Environment sector, the second sort of has these two components of natural resources, energy, water, forests, and then you've got sort of the regulatory questions, which is pollution, CO2 emissions, and so on. And regulatory work typically does not require a huge amount of fiscal outlay, but it requires a much more sort of the strengthening of laws and then the implementation of laws through the machinery. And we have seen already over the last 5 to 10 years, the regulatory side of the Ministry of Environment, whether or not they get allocations in budgetary terms, they've been completely gutted in terms of how they function on the ground or internally in terms of environmental clearances, forest clearances, and all the regulatory activities that they are supposed to do through the CPCB, through the NGT, or by, in a sense, incentivizing state governments to do similar kind of regulatory activity. And we are seeing no change in that. To give you just one small example, to the extent, as I said, that the fiscal may reflect the administrative, the budget for the CPCB has gone up, I think, by 0.5 crores or something like that, So there's no change. The budget for NGT has gone up by a few crores. We know that the NGT benches are not functional. We know that the NGT suffers from not having any adequate fact finding happening on the ground when petitions or appeals come to it for this thing. And its committees tend to be underfunded and dysfunctional in many cases. So just as tiny changes or not, in a sense, no more than inflationary changes in CPCB and NGT is a hint of what's actually happening, which is that the administrative side, to an extent also the legal side have been gutted. And so there's no real need to support the fiscal side of the story. Coming specifically to the energy side, which is the flip side, in the sense that here you see both the need, because it's a productive sector, it's about producing energy. So it is going to be infrastructure heavy. It is therefore going to be demanding capital interventions or subsidies at least. You see a lot of allocation, and you think, okay, this is great. At least they're putting a lot of money. And I think if superficially we evaluated that, we would say, yes, there is definitely a boost for renewable energy. And I think there's no gainsaying that if you only look at it from a technical or technological point of view. There's definitely support for storage cells. There's definitely support for manufacturing solar PV in the country, and so on and so forth. And you talk about massive amounts, right? 18,000 crores for one sub-program and so on and so forth. I think the question there we need to ask, because we have seen this in the past also, who gets the energy benefits and who gets the subsidy benefits? When these energy, sort of components of the energy system get subsidized or get capitalized, who is actually benefiting from the whole thing? And as we know already from the, we used to be in the energy production sector, for example, electricity, we still are on paper a heavily centralized, or shall we say socialized generation system, that NTPC generates a lot of the power, or state pollution power corporations generate a lot of the power. But we are moving towards more privatization. We are moving towards more privatization in mining, and we are moving towards huge privatization as far as renewable energy is concerned. And the option of doing a decentralized privatization of the kind of rooftop solar, for example, you see across the board very little attention paid to that. And that ties in with the problem of the discoms, and it's been flagged by other analysts also, that you can't really solve the electricity sector problem by just pumping in money into renewable generation. You have to worry about how the electricity will get distributed to the right people, which means you have to solve the discom problem, because as it is, thermal power plants are lying idle. The plant load factor in coal thermal is 60% in state power plants and 55% in private power plants. So you're not generating enough. Upping the capacity on renewables, etc., is not going to help unless there's somebody is taking that electricity and distributing it. And the discoms are not doing that because they are bankrupt, or they are saddled with all kinds of other problems. And there's very little shift in trying to solve the discoms problem that you see in this budget. Again, the budget can usually only reflect a little bit of what needs to happen through administrative and other legal mechanisms and so on. But to the extent that there is no real support for discom improvements, I think we can see that they have kind of only done a partial job. And the partial job is because there's capital investment, private sector is putting in money into renewables, you subsidize the private sector, you get, in a sense, it's a closed loop between the political system and the private capitalist system that we all know about. So I think that's something really to worry about, that we're not talking about a decentralized renewable energy system. I mean, when Emery Lovins talked about soft energy paths, decades ago, he was talking about the fact that nuclear energy is centralized and renewable energy is decentralized. But what we're reproducing is now a centralized renewable energy setup, which means highly capital intensive, which means profits go to those who have capital. So I think this is something we should be really worrying about. I'd like to talk about water if I have time and space for a second intervention.
Okay, great. Now I think we will come back to you, but that's important. But Sharad, just a quick follow-up question on the issue of energy. So, I mean, one of the things also that people have been talking about is that the energy sector in India has always been demand-driven, as in like whatever the demand is justified, and so therefore keep building newer and newer plants, and you can keep expanding coal, keep expanding solar, keep expanding everything. But obviously, there is no such thing as a continuously expanding sustainable energy sector, right? However clean the source might be. Is there any indication in this budget of looking at consumption itself in some way, especially luxury consumption or wasteful consumption?
No, I think absolutely not. Because I think this government, like probably many governments that we've had, but certainly this government does not believe in the, I think, concept of, the word luxury does not exist in its sort of dictionary. Because I think all consumption is good, more consumption is better, more GDP growth, whether it's because of the consumption by the rich or by the pathetic amounts of consumption by the poor, it's just about GDP growth. So I think there is no talk about demand side management, let alone. So as you know, demand side management is simply about improving efficiencies of consumption. It's not really looking at the who's consuming how much. But there's very little support for DSM as far as I can see. And the question of trying to divert consumption away, which, as you know, it's not that electricity is really consumed. I mean, it is consumed hugely in the household, but the embedded energy of our consumption patterns, whether it is because of the number of TVs I buy or the number of cars I own or whatever, it's the embedded energy which has a very large footprint. So which means we would have to try to influence the overall consumption pattern, not just the electricity bill, which anyway rich household, they don't even know what their electricity bills are. 2,000-3,000 rupees a month is just pocket money for them, right? So they don't even care about that. So I think it's always going to be looking at the structure of indirect consumption that contains the embedded energy that one has to focus on, and there's absolutely no sign of any talk about that.
So you don't believe Prime Minister Modi when he coins this new acronym called LIFE, which is Lifestyles for the Environment in Glasgow, right?
But that was just Glasgow. I think it was not meant for the
country. Well, maybe in fact, so that's a good segue to Soumya, because he spoke about hypocrisy. Soumya, let's come back to you on the issue of the carbon, not just carbon, but environmental or ecological intensity of the infrastructure and everything that's being proposed. Please elaborate on that.
Thanks again. See, this basically let me clarify one thing. Building up infrastructure, just by that word is not bad. Infrastructure is needed, and social infrastructure, particularly for a society like India, which has tremendous gaps, deficiencies in many of the social infrastructure, we need those social infrastructures. But if you look at the budget allocations in different sectors, like take the big allocation on the roads. The roads and highways sector has been given almost 2 lakh crores. What is the increase is 68% over last year. Compare this to increase of 0.5%, 1%, 2% in the Ministry of Environment and Forest, Ministry of Renewable Energy, very nominal increases. And what is this 81,000 increase meant for? It is almost, it says, it's almost totally will go for National Highways Authority of India. It will not go for small road connectivity, village road connectivity, the terribly broken roads many small towns have. Those have got small money, definitely. But the major increase, 68% of 81,000 crores, is going for National Highways Authority of India. And that I need not point out, because I will not duplicate what others have already said. Like Sharad has very clearly said, who stands to benefit from those kind of things, it's very obvious. Secondly, if you look at even like the sectors of your environment, connected to environment, what are the major requirements today? One, you yourself mentioned about the pollution and the kind of critical state of air pollution, particularly. Over the last 5-6 years, the concern about air pollution has actually overridden the concern of water pollution. If you look at historically, water pollution used to be the primary concern. But over the last 5-6 years, maybe up to 10 years, the air pollution has become an overriding concern. And that's because, as many of the studies are showing, 90% of Indians live under very bad air pollution conditions. So that's the condition. And many of the studies are showing that people who live in cities and towns, their lifespans are being cut by 6 to 9.5 years because of air pollution. So it's a very serious matter. So what we needed in terms of infrastructure also is one, social infrastructure, but apart from that, infrastructure to take care of these problems, to reduce these problems. I'll not say eliminate, because elimination in this system is not possible, but you could have easily reduced these problems by proper infrastructural investment in reducing air pollution. And how do you reduce air pollution? If you go for, in urban areas, if you go for much more public transport, electrified public transport, not electric cars, those have huge issues, but electrified public transport would have contributed hugely. Because if we look at the 5 studies that has been done on Delhi, including Kanpur IITs, you see 35 to 39% of air pollution in Delhi is contributed from vehicles, whereas 3 to 8 is only contributed by stubble burning, which gets all the attention and farmers get penalized. But the 39% of vehicular emission, they almost don't get any attention. So that's the kind of infrastructure investment we needed. Second kind of infrastructure investment we needed, which is connected with climate. See, the Modi talked great words in Glasgow. He's very good at, he's good orator, he's good at, probably his speechwriters are very good. So he gives good sound. Sitaraman also told about this, that climate is the greatest externality. And it's not only Sitaraman. If you look at ADB's earlier projections, ADB has projected that as per the present trend, climate change or climate crisis will be cutting up to 8% of economies of South Asia. GDP growth will be cut by 8%. We don't grow at 8% now. So that's a question that should have been addressed. What is being done now? The infrastructure sectors that are seeing maximum input is ports, highways. See, highways and roads are very high emission, very high intensity, not only the explicit emission, but the method of construction itself, cement, steel, concrete, all these, concrete, the mixing, all these, the making of cement and steel and the highways, all are very high emission sector. So if a really climate crisis conscious administration or governance would have invested in good infrastructure, then probably I would have expected, okay, how do you invest in, you cannot do away with roads. How do you do roads with less carbon intensive cement? There are ways, there are technologies. How do you transfer, you shift away from this kind of heavy steel, cement, concrete, intensive infrastructure like metro rails? That has not been seen. Metro rails has seen quite a big chunk of investment, budgetary allocation, some 20,000 crore, 19 or 20,000 crore, I don't remember exactly. So all the investments that you are seeing is basically on very high pollution, high emission, and those what can be used by those who have the means, like highways, national highways with access control, toll roads, you cannot use by cycles or those kind of things. It's basically for high-speed cars and those kind of infrastructure. The fourth aspect that I would like to point out, that everybody knows the kind of increase in climate catastrophe, climate extreme events, and not only the extreme events, but what we also call slow onset events, like the loss of productivity of agricultural crops because of the rise of temperature, particularly nighttime temperature, which is happening over the last several years, or sudden cold spells, which also affects agriculture, sudden rainy spells, which also affects agriculture. So what we needed in large infrastructure investment and also in climate action is risk reduction for masses. That is completely absent. You have climate action plans in all states. The national plan is not actually a plan. The state SAPACC, the state action plans on climate change, those are there. The total allocation is 30 crores. For the climate action plan, nationally, the allocation is 30 crores. As it was 30 crores last year, it is 30 crore this year. So what you can do with 30 crores in a country like India with 140 crore people, 139.6 crore people probably now. I don't know. But I don't know whether Nirmala Sitharaman even bothered to, or her officers have even bothered to look at this. No, it was there. It is a very, very low priority area. So in a sense, what they are saying, Modi said in Glasgow, Nirmala Sitharaman also said this in her budget speech, they are actually not looking at people and their climate impacts or the pollution impacts, or which is needed in infrastructural action is reduction of risk, reduction of exposure, and building up resilience. That's completely absent. So that's what I said. It's basically a hypocritical, hypocrisy is full in this budget. Now, what she is saying, what the budget claims to do, is not being done. But as I said, just last point, few minor points, those are as of now minor points, like if the transportation of railways shifts from bullet train kind of infrastructure to indigenously build this Bharat Vande Bharat kind of trains, which runs on the existing tracks, which are somewhat faster, that is a requirement. And if that can shift the traffic, the explosive growth of air traffic to some extent, this will have a positive impact. But you see a little focus on that, but a much larger focus on building up air transport infrastructure, which is very, very polluting. So it's either confusing or hypocritical. I'll end at that.
Thanks. Just a quick follow-up question, if you can give us a 30-second answer on this. Is there's some mention about a paradigm shift in urban living towards sustainability, and especially public transport as being a big focus. Do you think that is something that has positive potential, or is it also basically just talk?
Obviously, mentioning increased focus on public transport is a good thing. It's no doubt about this, but you need to be backed up. Those claims need to be backed up with massively increased allocations, because today public transport has gone down the drain in most cities and towns, except even in Delhi, the richest city in India. Even in Delhi, in the last almost 8 years, you have not seen a single bus increase. 5,600 or 6,000 buses were there around 2013-14. We still have around 6,000 buses. So we had in smaller towns, the public infrastructure of transportation has gone down. So we need to massively ramp up. And the last point on this is, if there was a genuine intention of improving public transportation in towns and cities, the focus should have been on buses and low-cost electrical transport, not metro rail. Because metro, apart from being very expensive, roughly 300 crores per kilometer of tracks built, metro also has huge embedded emission. That focus has not changed. So it's basically public transport for the well-off, for the upper middle class and the elite, at the cost of public transportation for the masses.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of double speak here, which certainly needs to be exposed. So they say public transport, but they mostly allocate it to metros, as you're rightly saying. They say non-fossil fuel energy, right? I think, again, Prime Minister Modi said 50% of our energy by 2030 will be non-fossil fuel, but the non-fossil fuel includes nuclear power and large hydro. So there's all these things hidden under, which most people don't even realize when they actually hear these things, unless they go into the more nuanced understanding of what's happening. Okay, finally, let's get to Raman. I think, Ramanji, you mentioned, especially in terms of disaster and water and wetlands, and I think we will come back to Sharad also on water, but please go ahead with elaborating your points on these two things especially.
Yeah, thank you so much.
And sorry, also manual scavenging, because we do need to bring in the whole caste and gender and Adivasi issues also. Please.
Thank you. So one fundamental thing I'll start with, because when we are talking about budget from or seeing budgets from environmental and ecological and other points of view, what we are missing over the last 10 budgets probably is that, sometimes we talk about 25 years goal, sometimes we could talk about the 2070, sometimes we talk about SDG goal. The medium term understanding or a long term understanding of what needs to be done, how needs to be done in some of these aspects. We had at least, although it was not very good, the kind of a framework, we had at least a 5-year plan to commit something. Currently, we don't even have that kind of an understanding of where we are going to go after this. So every year we are seeing the changing milestones in terms of introducing something totally disconnected from what has been done so far. That kind of a problem is continuously being visible at this point. So I think that needs to be highlighted. And also because of this approach, tick boxing is becoming more and more possible. So you can say something about something and without actually, as many told here, actually doing the proper allocation, substantiate what you are saying. With allocation is not happening. You are saying a 25-year kind of a thing, India at 100, that kind of a thing, and then say that this will come. But where is it going to come? Who is going to make the allocation? That kind of things are not coming. So this is one of the major issues that we need to address in terms of fiscal planning, I think. The second thing is also the provisional nature that is coming as part of this. So unless we have this long-term issue, long-term kind of understanding and vision, this provisional nature is going to continue every year, and next year also we are going to cry about this. So one issue about, I'll start with that, the specific point about air pollution, which already has been highlighted very well by Soumya, so I'll not add to those areas. But one important thing is that where is a integrated action plan for combating air pollution, which has been the demand. I've been part of the advisory of the Center for Environmental Health, and we have been looking at it from all areas, including infrastructure, including health, including various. So you need to look at this from a larger perspective. That perspective, if that is not being given, that is not being kind of pushed by. This is a demand over the last 7 or 8 years continuously coming up, and this budget also is not able to look at this integrated understanding of addressing air pollution. So that is one thing.
Raman, sorry to interrupt, but the National Clean Air, sorry to interrupt, just a quick follow-up on that. The National Clean Air program does not do that?
Well, the National Clean Air Program, if you look at this public transport thing that Soumya has been focusing at, so you need to make it, when you say Clean Air Program, that Clean Air Program is not just purification of air, it is also about preventing pollution. So I don't think, we are yet there. We are talking about some of the very specific infrastructure kind of, just like, in Delhi, you can see that Delhi Chief Minister is talking about one specific, larger tower that has been set up, which is, projected as the entire solution for air pollution. So these kinds of approaches are probably not going to work. The second thing is about the disaster resilience part. Now, unless our, budgets are focused, essentially, you mentioned about it when you see the overall, when you say major items in the budget, climate, disaster, environment is nowhere there. They are part of the others. They call it others. It is large others, but you don't know which are the constituents of these others. So how we can make disaster focused financing, climate focused financing, that kind of thing, every we had similarly we killed gender budgeting also sometime before. We had something, the idea of gender budgeting was introduced sometime before, how, and also we had inclusion as a kind of agenda that was coming in. All of these are remaining as verbal exercises, wherein some outcomes or some indicators are given. I don't know who is measuring these indicators also. I was looking at the outcome budget, and the outcome budget is having more than 500 pages. The 500 pages outcomes are committed like for everything. If you go through the outcome budgeting, all the environmental issues of India are solved. I mean, each year, I don't know how that kind of a commitment the ministries are able to make. So the outcomes are listed like every area, the outcomes are something, it's much more than impact, what they are saying as outcomes in many of the cases. So that is, I'll not go much further onto that. So here, disaster resilience, how, we can look at making entire planning process right from the panchayat level planning to national level planning, how the capacity building onwards to the planning, how we are going to reach there, and integrating all the various components into that kind of a resilience. This budget also, while the demands were very clearly there, we are not seeing that. On the other hand, there are some nominal changes, nominal hikes in the budget amount that we are seeing now. Now I'll come to the core of my submission here, is that the urbanization, whatever, the larger cities are growing in a particular direction, as you rightly said, from 91 onwards, the financial kind of reforms that is happening in the country has taken the urban development in the larger cities to a very specific area. Rural development at least has some, because of it is delayed, because of it is slow, only the NREGS and the Swachh Bharat mission kind of programs and the Jal Jeevan mission, they have invested very well into the rural areas. Although again, how the vision of a long-term ecologically sustainable development is coming as part of Jal Jeevan mission, because many of them are given to, in many states I am seeing it is larger programs rather than a local area community driven water supply program. What I see is the companies are given infrastructure laying down activities, and they are doing it as mega projects and all that. That is something a concern. But still, from the gender point of view, as you told, women, their kind of efforts and labor for getting water at household level may be reduced. That is one thing that I'm seeing as a important outcome of Jal Jeevan mission, provided the pipelines that are laid down now are pulling water to household level. So that outcome of the very outcome of that needs to be seen. At this point, we are growing towards that. But from last year, 50,000 crore that has been reduced to 40,000 crore at the revised estimate, and currently we have given another 60,000 crore for an overall 1.84 commitment of the 1.84 lakh crore commitment of the 5-year kind of thing. So whether we will reach within the stipulated time, 1.84 itself is something that we need to 1.84 lakh crore itself is that something that we need to see. So as a solution, we need to look at how the small and medium towns, currently they are not infected with the very infrastructure centered development. So maybe this is the right time. Maybe we can start with a different way of urban planning. If we can look at the small and medium towns can be developed into something, a resilient resilient urban planning, if we can introduce. These were the kind of options and possibilities and opportunities that were there, probably maybe for the next budget, or the next kind of planning cycle. We need to think about these kinds of things, wherein you can look at environmental sustainability, you can look at sanitation, you can look at water body conservation, you can look at various other aspects which makes life worthy and long-term sustainable. And then coming to the eradication.
Okay, the final point, please. Yeah, then we have to
eradication of manual scavenging that you were asking about. See, the problem is, from 1993 we are talking about this, and there is budget allocation without even spending the least segment of the money allocated. Every year we have a allocation made. This year also there are 70 crore rupees. Last year it was 90 crore rupees. But we are not even able to see how much has been spent, and what kind of every year we have changing figures, the surveys and various other things are happening. We need to really look at this inhuman kind of work, which is if you are looking, currently we are talking about barriers is the new word after the pandemic that has come. So the environmental kind of soldiers are the people who are working on the sanitation sector, the sanitation workers. So how to build their dignity, how to build their life, those kinds of questions, other than just allocating some money, the action plan which was expected from the government is still awaited for the last 4 years. And NREGS, the overall budget for that scheme also, the decentralized kind of activity that was possible, that is possible under the scheme, the allocation going down is a challenge for the Panchayat Raj institutions at the grassroots level. I'll stop.
Thanks a lot, Raman. And I think maybe at some point in the discussion, we can also come back to this. Your point about small and medium towns and the possibility of actually them having a different model, which is much more sustainable, etc. There is the announcement of a high-level committee to look at this so-called paradigm shift in urban. So whether that has any potential or not, we can come back to that in the discussion. Sharad, do you want to quickly add? You wanted something on water, and then we're going to go to the Q&A.
Sure. I just wanted to add that the water sector is more complicated because it does demand a lot of investments. And historically, our focus has been on investments, more dams, more canals, etc. Because it was seen like water is out there in the river and people need it out here. And how do we get the water from where it is to where people need it? That's been the focus of water policy for 50, 70 years. That hasn't really changed. Ken-Betwa link is just another example of that. That focus hasn't really changed. But you see, I think maybe because it's such a sort of money-intensive sector that you can always throw some loose change towards other angles. So we also need to remember that a lot of these small schemes are funded by World Bank money and ADB money and stuff like that. It's not really coming from the government's own budget. In some sense, we are getting more indebted in order to do stuff which is really the least capital demanding, which is groundwater budgeting, groundwater monitoring, putting in, and the National Hydrology Project is also funded by the World Bank. So all the data collection work, all the monitoring work, all the regulatory part of water resources seems to be only dependent on loans from World Bank and ADB, which I think itself is a problem. But if you look at the allocation, they are pretty substantial. We're talking about several thousand crores. In fact, the groundwater side of the story, it adds up to about 2,000 crores, which is, 2/3 of the Ministry of Environment's budget. So, total water resources management, this subheading is 2,000 crores, which is like the 2/3 of the Ministry of Environment's budget. So you would say, wow, these guys are pretty serious about the regulatory and the data collection side of the story. So there, I think it's the money which is completely out of sync with the administrative and the legal capacities that need to go hand in hand. We do not have a legal framework within which you could actually regulate groundwater. And we absolutely do not have the administrative and technical capacities built bottom up from the village onwards to regulate groundwater. We don't have a law which allows villages to regulate their groundwater and so on. As you know, the 2012, the working group headed by Mihi had tried to put out some draft bills in that direction. Nothing of that has been implemented. So it's sort of like money likely to go down the drain. The National Hydrology Project is a classic example. It's been implemented for the last 2 decades at least. We still do not, as citizens, have access to data on water resources the way we should have. The data are still collected by the state at public expense for the state. And that angle also hasn't really changed. So that's my sort of short intervention on that.
Thank you. We're going to come back to all of you with a final round of, sort of concluding statements. But before this, we have maybe about 30-40 minutes of the Q&A. So, IMPRI colleagues, can you please help with tracking the Q&A, and if they're specifically directed at anybody in particular, please do mention that. Otherwise, we'll throw it open for any of the panelists to answer.
There is one.
I'm looking at them, so if I miss something, then let me know. So I'm just going to go on. Is that okay? Just go one by one. So there's a question from Ashutosh Nanavare. Suggestions? Do you have any suggestions for young environmental science students? What should be the area of focus of students in the upcoming years? And I think I see Sharad was beginning to type an answer. Probably didn't manage to finish. Sharad, do you want to just speak it out?
Sure. I was just
and
going to
of
say
course
that,
connected to the budget, since that's the subject.
No, it's not really connected to budget. It's a very broad question.
Yeah.
And there is so much work to be done. Environmental science programs are also underfunded by and large, but where students come of their own volition and at their own cost, I think there's just so much work to be done, whether it is in the forest sector, going out and looking at how communities can and should and will manage forests, whether it's in the water sector, groundwater is a completely neglected area, and so on and so forth. One could just lay out a whole agenda on the renewable energies. And I think the consumption side of the story is now becoming more and more important. To the extent that production and consumption are delinked, we have to look at lifestyles Modiji's point in Glasgow about life is important. It's important for the world's elite. It is important for the Indian elite also. And we really lack data on consumption patterns and their environmental implications. So to the extent that students can help build up even small slices of that, it's going to be really, really important.
Thanks, Sharad. And also, I guess, to say that environment science does continue to remain a rather narrowly defined thing in most institutions. So how to actually, I mean, students should also be demanding that we don't want to do only this narrow science. We also want to look at the larger social, economic, political implications of the environment. So Ashutosh, if you want anything further on this, we're going to put everybody's email links. Hopefully the panel will agree with that. And you could please pursue it with the panel for further suggestions. There's a question from Manikanta Pia. We see investments ranging from piped drinking water to the river linking project. Both contradict in terms of creating winners and losers without knowledge of what is a water scarce basin. Would this alone add massively to already existing inequality in water accessibility in the coming years? So I think a number of points have already been made on water, but the specific thing of water and inequality, which one of you would like to address this? Raman, are you speaking? Because you're muted. So go ahead, Raman. Yeah.
Okay. So this it's an interesting question actually. So when the currently look at the data of Government of India, the major kind of contribution to 100% piped drinking water is emerging from two states. One is Telangana and the other is Bihar. In both places, Bihar is more decentralized, wherein Telangana's Mission Bhagiratha is the program which the government has spent, the state government has spent around 52,000 crore rupees for making the water supply program. And the very issue that Manikanta has highlighted here of how the spatial transfer of water is happening and how that spatial transfer itself is because the movement is towards the more urban kind of areas. So the people in the periphery, specifically those who are closer to the water sources, the equity issues have been a major concern that has been highlighted by some of the initial studies. As yet, we don't have very deeper understanding of how this is getting affected, but it is, from the initial kind of discussions and some of the observations, it's very clear that, there are equity issues to look at when we are looking at these large schemes. So how we will be addressing for the sake of people looking at the periphery, staying at the periphery of the water supply scheme, are we kind of also, actually neglecting the needs of those who are closer to the water source and the middle of the water source is a question that is going to come. And how, this is addressed, how the planning itself is taking care of these issues. So in Madhya Pradesh, we are, seeing that the Narmada water is being taken to many of the, nearby districts. Even villagers call it Narmada water. So these are, going to be major issues, I think, when we are, looking at the planning and in the financial allocation for looking at the most vulnerable communities around who are supposed to be left out of this. And also the community participation in this entire process, how to ensure that. So, budgeting is not just for, when you are talking about water and water conservation and management, we need to look at budgeting for community participation and ownership also. What are the mobilization processes? What are the ownership building processes? What are the institutional arrangements, which Sharachchandra has been talking about institution for the water part? What we are missing is the institutional arrangement for long-term sustainability of sources and the supply itself, including operations, maintenance, and etc. So I think this is a major issue that Manikanta is pointing. Thank you.
So I could just quickly add to that, sure. Just two sentences. So even if you take just the question of groundwater, it was initially touted as an equalizing groundwater exploitation as an equalizing technology because it made water available to people who are not in the irrigation command, not in the command of small irrigation tanks or large projects. So it was making water accessible to people in the rain-fed areas and so on. But if you trace the trajectory, so that access did actually go up. A larger number of farmers did get access to groundwater. but the uncontrolled depletion of groundwater has meant that access has dropped again, and all that remains, the people who now have access to groundwater, certainly in places like Karnataka, are back, it's back in the hands of the elite, those who can afford to have 5 borewells of which only one might function, or dig another borewell 3 years down the road, to 2,000 feet if necessary, and so on. So it's back in the hand of the elite. From a 20% penetration of groundwater among farmers, it's back to 5% or 6% or 8%. So I think that the absence of a regulatory institution which treats groundwater as well as all water as a common resource, and then says, how do we allocate water even to the landless? Just because they are landless doesn't mean that they don't have a right to that water, is, I think, a massive challenge that we have shied away from addressing for a long time.
And some of this is in the proposed national water policy, right? You mentioned Mir and others who were involved with that, but that seems to be stuck at the ministry in some way. It's been stuck for some time, yes. Okay, the next one is from Narayan Subramanian, specifically about hydrogen. Maybe Soumya, you can address this. What is the panel's opinion on long-term transition to hydrogen in the form of large bulk captive energy for electricity generation, fuel cells for transportation, etc.? Centralized captive solar wind can be used for hydrogen production. However, the question is of water, fresh or new technologies that use desalination for hydrogen production. This is missing in the budget with regard to infrastructure and research. Your thoughts?
See, the question of hydrogen needs to be understood very clearly. Hydrogen, first of all, is not an energy source that we probably know. Hydrogen needs to be produced with investment of more energy than you get out of hydrogen. So the part of the question which says for electricity generation is out of the question, because you need more electricity to produce hydrogen than you will get by converting hydrogen by a fuel cell. And by burning, you will get much less. By chemical combustion, by fuel cell, you will get some more, but still much less than you need to invest the energy to produce the hydrogen in the first place. Why hydrogen is being pushed? There are 2-3 reasons. One, if you look at transportation, most of the transportation, some kind of ground transportation is still being looked at as being converted to battery. That is, the renewable electricity will charge the batteries. I will not go into the other environmental impacts of batteries and all, because there are a lot of debates on that. I'm going into the overall situation. But particularly for air transportation, which is extremely energy intensive per passenger kilometer, for long distance sea transportation, and more than 70% of global trade depends on sea transportation, these are actually not feasible with batteries. So that is one reason why the industry lobbies and the governments are looking at hydrogen as an option for energy storage, large concentrated energy storage. But hydrogen also has tremendous energy losses. So you have to also look into that. The other reason why hydrogen is being pushed is basically, if you have to go away from coal, how do you produce steel? Many of the reducing industries, like iron ore has to be reduced to iron. So if you take out coal, you have to have another reducing agent, and hydrogen can replace it. It will not be very friendly in terms of energy, as I explained, but it will not be polluting in terms of carbon dioxide, the greenhouse gas. So those are the reasons why hydrogen is being pushed. But it also needs to be understood that hydrogen is extremely volatile. Hydrogen needs to be stored under tremendous pressure and tremendously low temperatures. So huge infrastructure and investments will need to be done to even start a hydrogen economy in some areas or some small form. So that will need the kind of investment where we have not been able to do even in our transportation, in our education, in our health, in water. So I think this is for India kind of economy, investing in a hydrogen economy, the hype that is being said, Ambani's will invest 1 lakh crore, somebody will invest 60,000 crores. I think this is way out in the future, if at all this happens. And this is not the only way. There are alternative ways, but obviously hydrogen will be needed probably for some of these things. Like if we still need to produce steel, forgetting about the other impacts of the steel iron ore mining and the steel production process, if you have to go out of the blast furnace and carbon process, you have to have this. And hydrogen is a very desirable reducing agent. So those are the kind of thing. But again, hydrogen economy is extremely expensive, extremely heavy infrastructure investment oriented, and also hydrogen is extremely explosive. If you have to handle hydrogen in a very, very careful or very high technologically oriented environment. So using hydrogen in a daily environment, like in your car, is likely to be very, very difficult, because hydrogen, as I said, is very explosive. So that kind of thing we have to keep in mind. And that way, let me say this again, hydrogen economy is not for low and middle income countries. Hydrogen economy can be gone into for high income countries, even at very high cost. That's why Germany is going for hydrogen economy. Germany and Japan are pushing for hydrogen economy. Not even all European countries are doing that.
Okay, thanks, thanks, Shomida. Not skip, but just jump to a few questions down, just to be able to diversify the voices in the panel, and then I'll come back to some of the questions that are earlier. So Debadityo, this is for you from Satarupa Bhattacharya. You referred to a very large thrust on the textile sector. Could you elaborate on the ecological implications of this?
Yeah, frankly, I'm not a textile expert as such, and my major concern was to see why this is a huge increase in this textile budget, and then for the industries. So industries means like, setting up mills and, for whatever industry means, it can be manufacturing, whatever. So that we need to go into much more detail. But of course, any industry will have some economic impact. So I'm not a textile expert to answer.
Okay, Satarupaji, if you want, we can send you some, maybe, unless there's somebody else from the panel who wants to address. What I certainly know is that the big textile industries are extremely polluting in many different ways, in terms of especially water effluents. And compared to handloom or the sort of domestic handmade sector, the big industries have a much bigger ecological footprint. So that, and there are some interesting studies on that. But maybe Satarupaji will put our emails down, and then Soumya, sorry, you wanted to add something?
Just one point. In fact, one reason, because this the government of India, in some sectors, this was being discussed earlier also, because you see that particularly textile the downstream sectors have potential to earn a huge amount of foreign exchange, and that also has a indirect cost in terms of huge kind of transportation, shifting. Actually, today what happens is cotton gets produced in India, the spinning gets done here, the threads go to another country, the cloth is made in one country, then the cloth goes to China, Bangladesh, this kind of thing. China is the biggest ready-made garment exporter, Bangladesh is the second. Then other countries like some kind of Haiti and others, these are coming up. So there is a huge global chain with inbuilt, you said pollution has multiple aspects. Just the transportation chain for the textile industry is huge. So the push is because of that, and because it has a huge potential for export earning, but also admittedly textiles, if the focus shifts, is a huge potential for employment, and not only employment, but livelihood. Like you mentioned, not only handlooms, because today you see most people in the villages have shifted away, except in remote villages, shifted away from handlooms to small power looms. If you look at how Banarasi, in villages around Banaras, how the silk sarees are made, Banarasi sarees are made, you'll see very few people are making in handloom. They have shifted to household power looms, run with a small motor. That increases their productivity from 3 to 5 times. So that kind of thing still has very little impact, but the focus here is completely different.
Yeah, just
in fact, when people talk about, Debadityo, go ahead.
That's it. So in this the budget document, Ministry of Textiles, it clearly has two subheads. One is the big industries, one is the small villages, small industries. So what I mentioned, this amount is for major big industries. Small industries already there. So it is not actually, I don't know, the beneficiary will be the common people.
Yeah, but I mean, the point here really is that, when the Prime Minister talks about self-reliance, there's very little focus on, say, village level self-reliance. So for instance, being able to produce all the cloth we need at that decentralized local level, which Soumya is talking about, whether it's handloom or it's power loom or whatever. And the same thing with so many other sectors, right? I mean, footwear, virtually everything we use at home, for instance, could be produced in that way, which would be probably ecologically better, but certainly livelihoods and dignified livelihoods way, it would be so much better than everything or most stuff coming from the big industries. But that we don't see really any kind of focus on. I will now go to, let's see, I'm just looking at, there was another question, I think, for, okay, maybe Madhuji, you can answer this one from Shweta Mishra. This is, well, I mean, in some senses, you all kind of answered this, but if you want anything more, why the government allocates such a meager budget when it comes to the environmental sector?
Difficult question to answer, but there's a huge need, definitely. I think fault lies at our end as well. We're not able to demonstrate the importance of environment and the resources to the policymakers and thinkers. Well, I'm an ecological economist, and Sharad will agree or disagree with me for many things that we do together and do independently as well, is to reflect upon the value of environment conservation. I'll just pick up two, examples from here. I was very happy to see about in the agricultural sector, the Jal Jeevan Mission, where the budget has gone up from 45,000 crores to 60,000 crores, and they're going to actually support, promote, accompany with the chemical-free natural farming alongside Ganga River, and NMCG, of course, doing huge amount of work in this particular domain. This is one thing happened, to promote organic natural farming, chemical-free farming. And of course, the common thread that we should keep across always is the creation of green jobs. Not just jobs, creation of green jobs. Now, Manrega, which has a scheme, has a potential for definitely climate resilience, carbon sequestration. The budget has been reduced by almost 25,000 crores, 98,000 crores to 73,000 crores. So that's what I was trying to say in the very beginning. Many times you have cancelling effects of things happening in the system. That must be actually balanced out, and across. This is you search for the popular terms, occurrence, the frequency in the budget. I would also say, how much is the job creation being done? All the interventions being made, how do they lead to creation of jobs? And then I would say green jobs, because so we are in the decade of ecosystem restoration. We are in the decade of achieving, SDGs at the end of 2030. We declared International Year of Millets. We talk so much about nature-based solutions, but let's walk the talk. Let's go in a way that, we are able to create, and green jobs are definitely labor intensive, and of course, as the nature-centric interventions we make, and they are very much labor intensive, and they provide a lot of support to such, marginalized populations. So that's what is the idea, definitely. I think, and then also reflecting the value. I don't say the value in monetary terms. I mean, we all work together. We know the importance of ecology, importance of economy, and blend them together to provide the answer. That's what is to be done. And why also? Because not much funding is coming for research and development. Like how much we struggle to get good funding to do such big projects. Like India still has to implement the green accounting system in the country. Many small countries, many big countries have done so, to understand what is the ecological cost of economic development. Not to stop economic development, but to understand, can we have second or third alternative to go for development, or just go for the one which is the shortest one, which causes huge amount of ecological damage, but it gives us huge amount of economic gain. You can't compare, the ecological losses with, economic gains. But what we get lost in the system is a huge amount of biodiversity, the uniqueness value of these species. We are so many hotspots, get disturbed, definitely, and that's what we need to take care very cautiously. And I think we raise our voice to get more funding, more budgets for, environmental sector, to demonstrate the value of intervention. Just a quick example, I was giving about the study that me and many people have done on demonstrating the value of rupee invested. The study by World Environment Council, UNEP, and in India, a couple of studies. If you invest in rupee in nature conservation, what it leads to? What it leads to is not getting accounted. We only look at the marketed economy, or the ones which are exchanged through a transaction process, that value gets entered into your accounting system. But the whole area of ecosystem services, we talk about carbon sequestration, the climate change benefits, gas regulation, water conservation, soil conservation, pollination service, for example, they're getting lost in the system. And we are paying huge cost for that particular purpose. Like in Himachal and, Uttarakhand, the forests have shifted upwards because there's a lot of destruction happening. The habitat of pollinators are gone. And then people are inviting actually these bee farms and, pollinating farms to pay huge cost, which you were doing actually free of charge earlier. But small amount of money not being paid for conservation, no incentives being created. I mean, there's a huge need for putting green taxes. And I think there's a very interesting, when the Biden's Build Back Better tax plan came up, tax super rich billionaires. We have no connect of biodiversity and business here in the country. I worked in IMPRI, and many of you, Shara is also part of a number of international processes, you Ashish as well. We know how important it is to connect business with biodiversity. You're using nature, you're using all the resources from nature, what you're giving back. The corporate socialist model doesn't take care of all these aspects. The environmental responsibility has to come up very strongly upfront. And why not, create a system where business invest in biodiversity conservation, invest in so-called nature-based solutions, and provide very cost-effective, I should say, sure shot kind of, returns to us. And it engages people, it provides jobs. And that's what kind of, holistic solutions should be provided definitely in the system. So I think we need to raise our voice to demonstrate to the examples, to influential interventions that are being made across the country. Now we are traveling across the country in a flagship study I'm doing at WRA and doubling farmers' income. How individual interventions have led to huge change in the system. There's no talk about fisheries model in the right now in the budget. Of course, the budget goes for fisheries, sector as well. But the supposing rice, paddy and fish cultivation, for example. Of course, we talk about millets. There's a spurt on millets definitely over here. Similarly, for wetland agriculture, look at, a couple of such examples can be taken up. Of course, we studied the organic farming model of Sikkim and a couple of others we studied. But that they require scaling up. They require, replication. Not exactly in the same way, but some packaging can be done and can be done. So that's what you need to actually raise voice, demonstrate examples through values that we require more budget for environment sector.
Thanks. But I mean, I think one of the basic issues here, of course, is that we continue to follow a classical neoliberal kind of economics, which still thinks of the environment as an externality, right? It's not something that is fundamental to economic planning and budgeting. So that is kind of, in a short way, also a response to that question. I'm going to get to some of the other questions. Soumya, Sharad, one of you can deal with this one in a very brief way. What issues does electrified private transport pose?
See, this I mentioned briefly. The electrified private transport is actually, first thing today, if you look at which is the topmost level, which is the easiest level to look at, is that roughly 68% of our India's electricity comes from coal today. That will change slowly. In fact, after 15 years of renewable energy push, our total renewable energy generation, forget about the installed capacity figures, the generation is around less than 5%. Our contribution to India's annual electricity generation is less than 5%. 68% from coal. So if you actually generate electricity from coal and then transport it 1,000, 2,000 kilometers, where 20% T&D loss or AT&T losses, AT&C losses are there, and then use that for 85% efficiency to charge the battery, and then 85%, 90% to get this out. So this is actually a very bad way of running electrified private cars through coal-generated electricity. Even if you generate it through a solar energy, a solar photovoltaic plant or a wind turbine or wind farm, that stands, because unless it is local, unless it is within a short distance, 100 kilometers, 200 kilometers, if you are generating most of your solar energy in Rajasthan in Thar desert areas, which are roughly 600 kilometers away, and trying to use that in Delhi, in maybe even Patna, then that advantage is lost, because the PLF in any case is very low for solar, a little lower for wind in some of the areas. And then you are using, at every stage, you are losing some of the energy. So where it stands to reason is if you use that scarce electricity generated through renewables in investing and running public transport. public transport, there are very clear figures known, and this is not my figure. This is Dinesh Mohan's center, this IIT center. They have done it many times. That if you, and many other calculations and analysis, that if you use public transport, say bus, even a diesel run bus, forget about CNG, the per passenger kilometer emission will be around 10 to 12 grams per passenger kilometer. Whether if you use a private car, it is even a small car like WagonR, it is around 120 to 130 grams per passenger kilometers. So 10 to 120, 12 times. So just converting that into a battery, and again, I'm not going into the issues of the battery. So that is very, very inefficient way. That will ultimately, actually, there are calculations that in a short term, this will push up the emission. In a longer term, this will reduce the emission, no doubt. But in a shorter term, this will actually push up the emission. And for climate, if this is for climate sensitivity, then the shorter term of 10 years is extremely critical.
Right.
Beyond that, we don't have much control.
Okay, thanks. So we still have quite a few questions. I'm not sure we're going to be able to address all of them. So apologies in advance to some people in case your question we can't get to. There's one from an anonymous attendee, which is to do with stubble burning and whether, in fact, the allocation on reducing stubble burning is actually a diversion. I think this has already been responded to in a sense, or addressed by Soumya when he talked about the percentage of pollution caused by vehicles versus the percentage caused by stubble burning. So definitely is more of a diversion. Of course, it will help, but it doesn't address the bigger issue. Sharad, the question for you, and in that you can also respond to the earlier thing about why environment does not get attention, which is you brought up 3 arms: fiscal, legal, and administrative. How, if can the budget contribute towards all 3? Has there been any instance of budgetary provisions in the past for the environment which have actually been able to address all 3?
Well, not really. I mean, you don't need a whole lot of money to pass a new law, right? So the groundwater bill, model groundwater bill has been pending for almost 10 years now. You don't need money for that. You need political support to really revamp that particular legal infrastructure. So I don't think it's about the fiscal supporting the legal in a sense of putting money into the legal. It's about going in tandem. The fiscal can support the administrative to the extent that, well, if you make big announcements but never recruit the staff, then that money will never get spent. And a classic example, for instance, is the ITDP, the Integrated Tribal Development Program. So the tribal departments in the states, as you know, are the nodal agencies for implementing the Forest Rights Act. Now, the change that the Forest Rights Act envisages is primarily a change in the ownership and control regime of forests in a way which makes it much more decentralized. And that has been, and that's where I would slightly disagree with Madhu in the sense that there are areas that it's been very clearly demonstrated by a vast amount of research that decentralized control over forests is much more likely to overcome the problem, the tragedy of open access, and to give communities a better livelihood at the same time. Because then you're not allowing the forest department or the state treasury to skim off the surplus from the forests through coup felling. Now, this is well demonstrated. So we don't need to keep on making the same case. And in fact, the Forest Rights Act was already passed. So the legal arm came into the picture and passed the act, but it has completely lagged when it comes to implementing the community forest rights provisions. And there it's like there is already money for it. The tribal departments have budgets for ITDP, which are unspent and returned to the center every year, but they refuse to spend money on implementing the community forest rights provisions of the FRA. So we have a very interesting kind of paradox there, that the money is there, the act is there, the tribal departments are empty in terms of the administrative side of the story, and they don't want to do anything about it by using the money or the act. So I think that's just kind of some of the contradictions that come in. The other point I wanted to make sort of a bigger point, which that how do we understand environment in the context of our developmental aspirations or our aspirations for a good life, however you put it that way. I think the two things that tend to get emphasized. So the development guys look only at the win-lose side of the story, saying, environment is an obstacle to GDP growth, because they are also casting the good life, equating that to GDP growth. And we have to do a lot of work on in a sense, unpacking and disabusing politicians as to the link between GDP growth and the good life for everybody, because it's tied to the question of equity also. The response, however, from some of the environmental economics community has been to show there is a win-win. And there's a win-win through green infrastructure, there is a win-win through eco-restoration and so on and so forth. But I think there we are missing the big sort of gorilla in the room, which is that a big part of modern development starting from Industrial Revolution is about moving from one kind of dependence on environment, which was on the biotic resource, to a completely different kind of dependence, which is on the abiotic resource, whether it's petroleum, whether it's coal, whether it is all the minerals that we can then extract and process, iron and steel and aluminum from bauxite and so on and so forth. And then later on the plastic revolution and so on. So we have, whether we like it or not, the post-industrial revolution era is about moving away from the biotic to the abiotic. We have not freed ourselves from nature, but we are not really dependent on living ecosystems. We're dependent upon cutting forests and mining coal or bauxite or whatever it is in a much bigger way. And a small part of now only roti, a part of roti comes from the biotic. Even that roti is hugely subsidized by chemical fertilizers and so on and so forth. So there also we are only partly dependent on the biotic. Kapada doesn't come from biotic. Makan doesn't come from biotic. Travel does not come from biotic. No bullock carts. It's all about highways and car transport. So let's be really realistic about this, that we have to confront this problem as analysts of the environment development paradigm and say, we are not talking about harking back to the bullock cart era. So what are we talking about? And as Soumya pointed out, that infrastructure, and that is going to be grey infrastructure, is going to be part of the story. The question is it about moving, as he said, moving yarn from 1,000 kilometers away and then spinning it and then sending it back or whatever, weaving it and sending it back to some other place? Or as another example was about bauxite, you mine it in Odisha, you send it to Iceland because Iceland has geothermal energy, quote unquote renewable energy, very cheap. So you use all the electricity in Iceland to convert it into aluminium, and then you send it to China for making all the products because Chinese are the only guys who are doing the manufacturing. So it's an unbelievable amount of carbon embedded in trying to move this mineral ore and then back the aluminium and so on. So it's this crazy idea that we can just expand the movement of products and services across the globe as much as we want. Only we need to do is tweak from non-renewables to renewables, or tweak a little bit this and that. I think that's the gorilla in the room that we really need to confront in some sense. How
Absolutely.
do we
Yeah, and I think, Arjun, maybe at a later stage, one can organize the webinar on what are the fundamental transformations we need in the economy to be able to address this. Because otherwise, as Sharath is saying, it's basically just tweaking here and there, not really addressing the roots of the issues. Right, there's an issue about impact of climate crisis on women. And if this is not the time to address it, then when are we ever actually going to address it? I think that's probably a rhetorical one. I don't know if anybody wants to deal with that, but it is true. It's not women. Of course, women very badly affected, Dalits, Adivasis, people with disabilities. So those who are already marginalized in society are badly impacted by the climate crisis, and there's actually nothing in the budget that deals with this. Maybe we can sort of just proceed with some of the others, unless some panelists, maybe in the concluding remarks, if you want to say something about this. Anything in the budget with respect to actions on mitigating land degradation and desertification? This is from Samarth Khanna.
So I would like to respond to that.
Yeah, please.
So basically, like I was thinking this thing that, in our entire budget discussion, we lose the concerns of the wildlife and the forest, which no one gets lost, because it is about talking about the rights of the ecosystem. We are talking about rights, what rights we have. And if you see the budget, all these autonomous institutes under ministry, I think there are only few. So WII was a major institute. The funding has been curtailed, and this funding has largely remained same or reduced. And if you see this, if you talk to any forest department in any state, all the ground staff, the frontline forest staff, who is actually there anyway, the capacity is less. There are one forest guard for 3-4 beats is practically impossible. There is no recruitment. Just for example, I went to Jharkhand just last month, and I was told that not a single range officer has been recruited in the last 10-12 years. And after retirement, their contract has been renewed at 1/3 of the what they used to get. So this kind of situation is there, and protecting our forest, it much depends on who is in the front line. And this issue has been persistently every year it is talked about, but this year there has been some increment in the budget to the states, but I think that is not very significant. And also these national parties authorities, central authorities, there are 4 or 5 authorities, regulatory authorities with the MOA, which is budget is almost same or reduced. And this year, the biodiversity conservation, the budget for conservation has actually reduced to 8.5 from 12 crores. So this itself shows how much sincere we are about conservation of land or forest. And one more point I just want to make it, is very much linked to the environment, because last year, you remember, our Prime Minister announced that there's some 1 lakh crores rupees plan for national oil palm policy, national edible oil policy, oil palm, something like that. Very fancy. Though this edible oil policy has been there, but oil palm has been added. But what is important here is the focus will be now on Andamans and the Northeast very clearly, and they have target to increase from 300 hectares to some 100,000. I don't know what it is. And this is also biodiversity hotspot. No one is talking about this budget. I was especially looking out how it is impacting the budget. That is something I was looking. So 900 crores is allotted for this national oil palm policy. And there is, just give me a moment. I'll just give you just figure and just stop here. And this public is production linked incentive for food processing industry. It is separate from the PLI scheme under the budget. It is separate, like, not a separate heading. PLI for food processing, 1,022 crores, which was 10 crores last year. 100 times jump in the budget for this food processing industry. And the intention, so I just want to just reiterate here, the primary objective is to support creation of global food manufacturing champions, support Indian brands of food products in the international market, increase employment opportunities of farm jobs, and ensuring remunerative prices for farm produce and higher income to the farmers. One more caveat to it, there is an autonomous institute under the Ministry of Food Processing Industry. It was called Indian Institute of Food Processing Technology. There has been yearly budget for 30 crores, which is stopped this year. So that means this capacity building you have completely shut down. Now you have, and who is the food processing industry? We all know there are 2-3 big food processing industries, and they will benefit out of it. This push for oil palm policy and this entire thing, you have to connect the dots, and it is all affecting the environment. So, and then there's laws and amendments are already there. So that answers the question, like, why, what are we doing for land education of forest? Thank you.
Thank you. And this is also in addition to what Sharad was talking about, how one could actually do much more economical conservation and regeneration, restoration through community initiatives, but that's not really supported if you look at different aspects of what needs to be there as support. Sharad, actually, this next one is to you, which is on, where I just lost it now. Considering a lot of the projects are on loans from outside, shouldn't the balance have been taken into account? Is road infrastructure the best way forward for development of cities, because all the NHAI projects are on huge loans? So the whole issue of loans, maybe if you want to address that in a minute or so.
Well, I'm sure Soumya and others can also chip in here, because I'm not fully conversant with the funding side of NHAI. I do know that they take loans, but they also try to recover them through these toll plazas that they have. And in fact, the story, as far as I understand, is that eventually they recover all the costs, but they continue to take the toll even after the cost has been recovered. In many places, at least I've seen this, starting from the Thane Bridge example of Bombay, decades and decades ago, when I think the first tolls were put in place, where the tolls are still continuing. So I think those loans may also be internal loans and not necessarily coming from the World Bank or external sources. I'm not very conversant with that. Maybe Soumya can respond to that. I think the larger question, of course, remains is that when you make budgeting, do you look at loans as also part of your revenue stream? And if so, you're only pushing the problem to the future. So the deficit budgeting is not just the expenditure over and above the budget, but also the above the income. But if in your income you're counting actually loans like from the World Bank and ADB and so on and so forth, then that's not really income anyway. So I think we're just pushing the problem, and you can see some of that in the loan servicing side of the story. How much of the budget goes into servicing interest and capital repayments? It's a very large fraction of the whole budget. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I think we are talking about 30 to 40% of the money going as expenditures going essentially as servicing debt. So I think that's the larger story. The comments I made about the National Hydrology Project are a very small part of the larger story of heavy dependence on loans.
See, the loans for the highways basically is not as large as if you look just highways as highways, national highways, is not as large as the metro projects. Metro projects are largely built by Japanese loans, JICA loans. But if you look at the corridor projects, DMRC and other corridor projects, which also includes the roads, highways, and the dedicated freight corridors, all these linear projects which are basically dedicated to fast goods transport, these are largely funded by foreign loans, either from Japan apart from ADB, and these are the kind of thing loans. And if you, it's not only paying back, like Sarath very clearly said, it's paying, loading the next generation, it's double loading the next generation. Because if you look at loans taken around 2000 or around that year, the dollar rupee exchange rate would be around, I think, I don't remember exactly, but something like 35, 40, less than 40. Today it is 75. So you will be paying back double the money. Whatever is the interest, the original loan becomes double. So this is an unavoidable situation and conversion between a high inflation economy and a low inflation economy. That's obvious. So you will be paying back at a much higher original price. And these are not, most of these are not very concessional loans. Like most of the loans from JICA, not very concessional loans, unlike the World Bank, IDRB, IDA loans. So actually we are creating something which the elite today, or the high, not only the elite, the upper middle class and the upper classes will be using most, and the future generations will be paying the entire cost. So that's the kind of thing that we are creating.
Yeah, including the ecological cost, because linear projects
Yes.
attract much less environmental regulations than others.
But if you look at
Imran has
1,000 kilometers of highways to be built this year, what will be the environmental destruction? 25,000 kilometers into just the highways will be 200 meters plus both sides. So just calculate this, and then eco restoration that Madhuji was talking about. What kind of eco restoration that means? But just one comment. I think governments and their heads, including the great Biden that Madhuji referred to, he is doing a great job. Just before coming to Glasgow, Biden had a meeting with OPEC, and Biden asked them to increase oil production substantially so that the oil price in the American market, the gas price, gasoline, is lower. So this kind of double talk, when Johnson was the host, he was pushing very hard for the Cambo North Sea oil drilling project, which is a massive, which was finally stopped because of resistance. So this kind of double talk and hypocrisy is very common among world leaders. Modi is a champion of champions, so that you have to give credit to him.
Thanks. Imran has a question about whether, I'm going to skip to the last part of his question. The carbon trading, will communities benefit from carbon trading by using Energy Conservation Bill 2022, or will it again go to corporations?
Should I?
Who wants to? Go ahead, Shami.
See, the carbon trading, the former carbon trading mechanisms, there are several carbon trading mechanisms, somewhere within countries, somewhere within Europe, like the ETS, somewhere global, like the CDM. CDM was the most widespread global carbon trading mechanism. We did studies of around 35, 40 carbon trading projects. Carbon trading projects means projects which received carbon trading benefits in India. India had the largest number of carbon trading benefits, project benefits. China is the largest beneficiary in terms of total money, and other countries got very little. And all of these had violated the basic sustainability provision in the carbon trading CDM mechanism. All of these have violated the basic tenet that the emission has to be reducing in some place. In fact, if all analysis, the emissions have increased in both the buying countries, in the selling countries, and globally. And the question that whether the communities will be benefiting, there is a classic study of the first large-scale Red Plus project in Kenya. You can read the study. It's actually aggravated the class differences, the economic differences in the community. You can go and study this in Meghalaya, the Mophlong project. It's shrouded in mystery. Nobody knows means some public figures are there, publicly known figures are there, but none of the local people know how much money has come, who has got the money, except these 2-3, this local chieftain. I'm forgetting his Lingdo, some Lingdo. So I don't know where this has, except if it comes into, like we discussed earlier, where Ashish was also there, if it comes in, probably, I'm being very generous in this, the last comment, that if it comes in giving a push for changing over from industrial chemical agriculture to agricultural practices, and in that there is a possibility of carbon money coming with a lot of care, then there might be some benefit to the communities. Otherwise, the way the carbon market has gone till now, it will not be beneficial to communities. It will be doubly impacting to communities. And I have studies from Mundra. Adani Mundra is a one carbon trading beneficiary. Reliance Sashan is a carbon trading beneficiary, and the kind of massive brutality, massive deprivation they have caused, you have to go and see. I have done studies in 2012 and 11, so those are also available.
Thanks, and I think all the panelists have been mentioning studies, etc. So they're putting their emails down. So if anybody wants to get in touch and get these studies, then please do write to them. The anonymous attendee has 3 comments, all of which are kind of linked and I think have been in some way or the other addressed, which is the fact that there's been dilutions in laws, that there is single window clearance, that etc. etc. And so with all of that happening, what is the point of budgetary allocations? And that's actually something that Sharad and others have also been pointing out, that the regulatory mechanisms are actually all being whittled down. So even if you do put some allocations into the budget, it's not really going to mean very much. It's actually becoming a bit of a greenwash. Shruti Reddy, your question about whether this present government is doing more for the environment than the ones in the past. I don't know if anybody wants to address that. My own analysis of this is that they've all been pretty bad, but this government has been extremely bad in many ways, not just in terms of diluting environmental regulations, etc., but also cracking down on environmental organizations, including using repressive laws and calling us seditionists, etc., etc. But this is not to say that the Congress was all hunky-dory. But maybe in your concluding remarks, if anybody wants to say that. One last question I want somebody to address, which is on the sovereign green bonds, because this is something new that's come into the budget. Is this going to be of any use? Does anybody have any analytical answer to that?
If anyone else is fine.
So, very quickly, what I could understand from this, this is a kind of domain of green finance, definitely. And they want to mobilize resources for green infrastructure, like against what we are trying to do through build a green infrastructure. That's what I could understand through this. And definitely will be deployed in public sector projects, reducing carbon intensity in the economy. That's what is the idea I could imbibe. But still have to see how will they actually get affected on ground.
Thank you. So Madhuji, maybe you want to add anything quick in the last concluding, and then I'll go to the other.
Very quickly, as I said, to protect our natural resources, biodiversity, definitely. Why can't we also have a greater involvement of the corporate sector, the business sector, and what the Bezos Fund has created in US for the entire globe. Let's create a kind of a corporate-based kind of a fund, environment fund in the country, because we do face crunching of resources in Ministry of Environment, and not just it's embedded across many other departments, ministries that need to be definitely taken care of. So I think that would provide, plus shifting the paradigm from polluter pays principles. So let's just go for more of such taxes and incentives for conservation led kind of initiatives. Then only I think we'll be able to solve the problem to some extent.
Thanks, Madhu. Debadityo, back to you. Any last point?
Yeah, I already said that we need to protect our natural resources, and for that I think the states need to be supported in terms of more funding, protection of forest, and of course there are some authorities like WCCB, like Wildlife Conservation Bureau, and WI, this kind of autonomous institute, which have been very important for research and part, and also the intelligence part of it. That at least that need to be strengthened. So that has been missing since you have set up the institution, but you are not supporting them anymore. So yeah, so that's my side.
Thank you, Sharad.
I think I'd just like to add, we've already had a very long discussion on many of the shortcomings, and you're absolutely right that there's not a huge difference between the previous regimes and this regime for the last year, except that it's much more blatant now. The Ministry of Environment's homepage, the way it measures its achievements is through number of projects cleared and how fast they were cleared, not through the environmental due diligence that they did or how many environmentally destructive projects they actually stopped. So I think it's just much more blatant, much more bindas, and much more kind of even the sort of face savers are missing. Previous regimes did actually do more than just face savers. There were occasionally very important legislation like Manrega and FRA and a few other things that were passed. So I think there is a significant difference there. Without glossing over the contradictions of a Manmohan Singh-led government that was still basically growth focused, but it had enough space for some internal contradictions, I think. I think therefore this I think is an opportunity for us, that is, who care about the environment, to reflect much more on how our own contributions are contradictory, to the extent that we might be still tagging or hooking onto the GDP growth bandwagon and saying, if we can only send a little bit of that money towards the environment, then it will fix the problem. So if maybe MOEF budgets went up from 3,000 to 6,000 crores, we could kind of fix the problem. And I think the problems, all this conversation that is highlighted, is that the problems are much more deep rooted. And we have to look at, as you said, Ashish, not the direct, but the indirect relationships between funding in other sectors or non-funding of other sectors and its implications for the environment. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot. Soumya.
See, basically, I will differ a little bit from some others' comments that budgetary allocation and budget funding is not important. Of course, that's not said, but given the present situation where through GST, the central government has sort of centralized the tax revenues and is arm twisting state governments. The state governments are on a begging bowl, except those who depend on daru, sharu and petrol, which are excess sources like the government of Delhi and city of Delhi. So there is still an importance of the central budget, at least for guiding the direction of quote unquote development. And development don't need to be destructive. Development can be multiple ways constructive. The second aspect I would like to highlight is very clearly is that undoubtedly this government has, if you go by the number of laws either demolished or diluted, this government has excelled in destroying all environmental regulations and frameworks that Sharath was talking about. And this is unparalleled in history. In fact, over 30 years, whatever has been built up, they have almost succeeded in demolishing most of this. And whatever little are left is because of massive resistance, and that too, I don't know how long. Though this is very clear now that if there has to be a turnaround, the entire philosophy, entire direction of the government has to change, and that cannot happen with this government, because this government's entire direction is very different. And last point, very important point, I think we need to reclaim from the corporate ownership, corporate initiative to public ownership. Because what Madhuji is saying is extremely dangerous. We have seen self-certification being promoted. We have seen massive public resources being handed over to corporates for free. We still don't know whether Ambani has returned the sea areas which was given for this KG basin, the 80,000 square kilometer or something, and that's only one. So we need to reclaim as governance mechanism the public resources for the public and control corporates through regulation. Let them make profit, but let them make profit under strict public regulations. This dilution of regulation, giving corporates free hand, self-certification and all kinds of exemptions has to go if there have to be any chance of sustainability and future being reasonably good. Otherwise, we are doomed.
Thanks, Soumya. Raman, last word. You're on mute.
Okay, thank you. So I'll further build on that point that I made on the small towns. So the future of financing the environment should be centered around the small and medium towns, and also the rural areas and forest areas, wherein a larger protection and larger long-term kind of a planning and a medium-term and a short-term. All the three levels should be understood, and based on that planning and then financing, that is the kind of way forward that I'm seeing. And for that, institutional and regulatory framework is quite important, as previous speakers also have identified. And the financing should look at human resources, sufficient human resources, and understanding of local governments about the futuristic planning in an environmentally sustainable fashion. The budget talks about centers for sustainable living. That is what is the definition coming for cities there. So if they have to be centers for sustainable living, you need to have proper understanding, proper kind of fueling, proper regulations. All that requires for that purpose. Thank you.
Thank you, Raman. I am not going to attempt to in any way summarize this very rich and complex discussion. It's actually been pretty fantastic. I've learned certainly a lot, and I'm hoping that the audience also has. Just, I think, a couple of last points from my side. I recently had, just 3 days back, had a interesting interaction with the economics department of one of the southern universities. And I asked them if they knew the original meaning of the word economics. And the fact that it came from oikos, the Greek word for home, and they didn't. It wasn't part of the syllabus. None of the alternative economics or ecological economics or all the stuff that we talk about, nothing was in the syllabus whatsoever. Now, that is not their fault. It is the way the system is, which is still pushing, as I said earlier, the kind of conventional, classical, neoliberal economics. And that is underlying the planning process, the budgeting process in the country, the governance process of the country. And unless we actually fundamentally change that. I also asked them if they knew the original meaning of the word ecology, and the fact that that also comes from oikos, and that if ecology is the understanding of home, economics is the management of home, and how can you manage a home without first understanding it? They were like, ooh, we never were taught that. Nobody told us that. So it just shows the kind of clear disjunction that has happened in the way modern economies are planned. And unless, therefore, we look at sort of much more fundamental alternatives in terms of decision making, governance, who's taking decisions for what, for whose benefit, in what way, etc., and therefore who is controlling the economy, we are only going to be tinkering around here and there, as I think the panel has very clearly pointed out. And unless we actually also bring the institutional, the fiscal, the policy, legal, and the overall governance in sync with each other, simply changing either a law or the budget or administrative structures is not going to really help the matter. So I think with that, we're going to be concluding this session. Thanks to all the panelists for some really exciting, fantastic interventions. I think we need to follow this up because it's been a bit of a depressing session. We really need to, Arjun, we really need to follow this up with a session also on what are the alternatives, what are things that are already happening on the ground, which are pointing to some of these fundamental changes, and what more needs to be done, can be done. Perhaps that could be a follow-up session, so we end up also with some hope and not just depression. Thanks, that's it from my side. Over to IMPRI for your concluding remarks.
Thank you, sir. And your work on rainbow recovery also very important thus to look into that. Okay, so thank you all the distinguished panelists. And now I invite Anshula Mehta to give an official vote of thanks. Anshula, over to you.
As we come to the end of this extremely important and engaging deliberation on the Environment and Union Budget 2022-23, I, Anshula Mehta, Senior Assistant Director at IMPRI, would like to propose a formal vote of thanks. On behalf of the IMPRI Center for Environment, Climate Change and Sustainable Development, I thank our distinguished panel for taking out the time to be with us today. We are grateful to Mr. Ashish Kothari for chairing the discussion and driving it with his valuable guidance, inputs, and interventions. Thank you, sir. We thank our panelists, Mr. Debadityo Sinha, Dr. Madhu Verma, Dr. Sharachchandra Lele, Mr. Soumya Dutta, and Mr. V.R. Raman for joining us and sharing their pertinent analyses, rich insights, and perspectives on Budget 2022. And of course, we are grateful to all our participants who joined us here on Zoom or on Facebook Live and raised such thought-provoking questions, and to those who would be watching us later on YouTube or listening to us on our podcast. We hope that you continue to tune in to future episodes of Planet Talks, as well as our other web policy talks. And we also invite you to join us for more of our upcoming discussions on the Union Budget 2022 over the next few days. Thank you again, and I wish you all a very good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
You'll share the recording with us, right? So we can.
I